It's another day and we're out with another retro motorcycle. This is the Kawasaki W800, and after having ridden it for a while, I can tell you that it does something so well that I'm quite infatuated by this bike. And yet there are other things that make me question how retro is too retro.
Take the way it looks. Pure, simple and old school. There's a large teardrop shaped fuel tank, simple yet elegant side panels and a pretty ribbed seat. Almost everything you see and touch is metal, and the lovely dual P-shooter exhausts look perfectly period correct. The simplicity is everywhere to be seen, whether it's in the spoked wheels with their tube tires, or the very basic looking foot brake lever, or the big rubber foot pegs. The switchgear is astonishingly basic, and it looks like it came off a 100cc commuter from the early 90s. It even lacks a pass light switch. The same goes for the round meters that look very nice but don't have a fuel gauge and leave you to rely on a reserve fuel warning light. Reinforcing the point of honest old world design are the bulb illuminated indicators and tail lamp. And this is why I can't get over that modern LED headlamp. It works well, but it just doesn't fit with the rest of the theme.
So the style is quite different from the sharp and angry things you usually see in Kawasaki showrooms, but what hasn't changed is the over-engineered solutions for India's regulations. Now I really feel like Kawasaki's engineers are having a good laugh at the silly rules they have to comply with for India. For example, I can imagine the conversation behind the sari guard went something like this. Oh, you want a guard for traditional ladies' attire? No problem, we shall build you an impenetrable fortress along the side of your motorcycle. And now you want to ruin the design of our bike by putting a number plate right in the front. Alright, here you go. This is the most hideous solution that we could come up with, and we've made sure to put it right in front of you so that you have to look at it every time you ride your bike. Okay, now I'm joking about that, but I honestly can't see any other reason for how Kawasaki could have come up with something that looks like this.
Thankfully, this Kawasaki seats you in a completely upright and comfortable riding position. So once you're riding, you're mostly looking forward and not down. The swept back handlebar feels instantly comfortable, and the seat height is welcomingly low at 770 mm, but despite this, I didn't feel cramped on the bike. Overall, this is a natural riding position that places you in a state of just wanting to take it easy and soak it all in. And that's a good thing, because you would do a great disservice to this motorcycle to simply judge it by its spec sheet. Now this bike is all about the emotional experience.
And that brings us to what is undoubtedly the standout character of this motorcycle, that lovely old school feeling engine.
This engine format is very similar to what you'd find in classic British twins from 6 or 7 decades back. And it's not purely by coincidence, because a little internet investigation will tell you that the W800 draws its lineage from the BSA A7, a British motorcycle from the 1950s. Of course, it has evolved tremendously over the years, and there are many changes, including a fleet of electronic controls that work silently in the background. But even today, this motor remains simple and it packs a unique twist. Today, this engine uses a relatively modern single overhead camshaft and an 8-valve design. But instead of a traditional chain that connects the cam on top and the crankshaft at the base of the engine, this is done by a shaft drive with beveled gears at the top. And that's what that chrome shaft on the right hand side is, in case you were wondering. It's a complete rarity, and almost no modern engine today uses this system.
And that's the beauty of this engine. Now, whereas rivals have moved on to liquid cooling, ride-by-wire, 270-degree cranks, the Kawasaki keeps it simple. This engine is cooled only by the air. There's cables connecting the throttle, and it has a conventional 360-degree crankshaft. Now, you will feel the effect of that quite tangibly, starting with the way it sounds. That is a really nice old school soundtrack.
With such a nostalgic tune, it's no surprise that this bike has a riding experience to match. This motorcycle is all about the torque. Superbly smooth and beautiful waves of torque that arrive as soon as you ease the clutch out. At gentle speeds, the W moves along in a beautifully smooth and effortless manner. There's absolutely no jerkiness, and you can glide around in 5th gear as low as 35 km per hour. While there is no 6th gear, Kawasaki has given the bike a slip and assist clutch that makes for a very light clutch lever and smooth responses on downshifts. As for that bevel gear system on the right hand side, well, it never came in the way of my knee and there was no worrisome heat to be felt. In fact, even in jam traffic, the engine just felt warm but never got hot, and I actually remember a Royal Enfield Himalayan feeling hotter than this, and that's really impressive for such a big engine. I genuinely enjoyed riding this motorcycle at a mellow pace, and it just shows that how making bikes that are a pleasure to ride at slow speeds is becoming a lost art. But don't be fooled into thinking that that's all this engine can do, because the W's motor can rev to over 7000 RPM, and when you do that, this bike will accelerate at a pretty brisk rate.
Now there is a reason why most modern classic twin-cylinder motorcycles, including the Triumphs and the Royal Enfields, have moved to the 270-degree crankshaft, and that's because they produce a smoother engine.
360-degree cranks have always been known for vibrations, and while the W's engine has a balancer shaft, you will still feel a judder in the handlebar and foot pegs between about 80 and 110 kph. It's not unbearable, but if you plan to do long distances on this bike, you'll either want to settle below or above that speed, and the W can manage both.
You know, we like to look back at retro motorcycles as this long-forgotten art form of motorcycling that was perfect and today's bikes have ruined it. But the truth is that old motorcycles were quite terrible to ride in many ways, and that's why I like what Kawasaki has done with the riding experience here. The engine produces the original, authentic feelings, but without too many of the drawbacks, and it's a very similar story with the chassis.
First of all, the ride comfort is really very good, and you only feel an impact on your back when you hit massive potholes at speed. On paper, the 130 mm of ground clearance is worrying, but I found this bike was easier over speed breakers than the 650s from Kawasaki. With the right preload settings on the rear shock, you'll just about be able to manage with a pillion over speed breakers as well. And that's a good thing because my wife tells me that this bike has one of the nicest passenger seats she's experienced in a long time. When it is time to slow down, the brakes work perfectly well and there's a dual channel ABS to keep things safe at both ends. Then there's the double cradle chassis itself. The W is quite a decent handler and I found enough confidence in the front end to be able to trail the front brake quite deep into corners. Push it hard and this bike is decently good fun, but as with its retro rivals from Triumph, the foot pegs will start scraping quite easily if you start throwing it around. In fact, try hard enough and you can even scrape the pegs while taking a U-turn. That sort of easy stability comes from the fact that the W has a long wheelbase and a lazy steering angle. But surprisingly, the handlebar doesn't require much effort in traffic and the bike also feels much lighter on its feet than the 224 kg curb weight would suggest. Overall, I found this a very easy bike to ride in the city even when there was a lot of traffic around it. And finally, yes, this bike comes with MRF Nilo Grip tires. Honestly, I never found them lacking in ability, whether on the wet or in the dry. But yes, it is hard to stomach the same brand of tires that you will find in bikes that cost up to 10 times less. In fact, that leads us nicely on to what is the biggest issue with the W800.
As much as I've enjoyed the gentle, warm and welcoming character of this motorcycle, at 6.99 lakh ex-showroom, the price is a little hard to digest.
Unfortunately, there's not much that can be done about that because apart from the tires, there are almost no localized components on this CKD import motorcycle. Moreover, when you compare it with its direct rivals from Triumph like the Street Twin and the much more expensive Bonneville T100, the W is more affordable, but it also doesn't come close in the feel-good factor. Triumphs are beautifully finished these days with great care taken to hide unsightly wires and hoses, and you just can't say the same for this Kawasaki. There's also the temptation to compare it with the Royal Enfield 650s, and while the Enfields are quite different to ride with a more sporty nature, again, the Kawasaki simply cannot match the price of locally manufactured bikes that were envisioned from the very start to be shockingly cost-effective. Nevertheless, remember how we said earlier that this bike was all about the emotional experience? Well, that holds especially true when it comes to making a buying decision.
So here's how we're going to sum up this motorcycle. If you walk into a Kawasaki showroom and you're looking for the typical level of features, quality and performance that you'd expect for around Rs 7 lakh, you might as well walk right past this bike and go look at the Z900 that's probably parked next to it. But if you are looking for a genuine old school riding experience with modern conveniences like ABS, clean emissions and a decently capable chassis, there is no other bike I can think of that rides like the Kawasaki W800.